Oh, since a lot of you are here, I will also just remind you that if you would like to pass, you have to turn things in. So if you are missing assignments, there's 3 each week. There's something, you have to turn in 3 things each week. One's just a straightforward question. You choose one of 4. Then there's a document exercise, and there's only one option. And then you take a quiz. There are a handful of you who are only taking the quiz. That will only give you 1/3 of the possible points, which means if you do really well, you end up with a 33% in the class, which is not quite passing. So if you're one of those people, which a couple of you on this list are, go back, do your assignments, okay? And you can't wait much longer because, you just can't. We're in the next to last week of class. So you got to get her done. All right. Can't think of other stuff I need to say except recording tomorrow, normal class on Thursday, and shouldn't be any more excitement for the rest of the class that makes things unusual. My brother did text me, and he and his wife are sending my nephew to come stay with me next week. So maybe he'll come and have class with us. Not a chance. He's 17. He'll be asleep, but we'll see how that goes. If he does, I should give you extra credit. Yeah, that's what we should do. Extra credit if my nephew comes to class. I'll tell him that your grades, rely on his getting up before noon. All right. Where were we? Chapter 10. And then when we're done talking about chapter 10, we'll go back and look at questions and such. Although maybe in this version of the notes, the question is built in. Let me peek. Maybe I got excited here. Maybe I did that. Nope. Not really. It's Andrew Jackson Day. All right. So I always give a disclaimer on Andrew Jackson Day. One of my least favorite presidents. Sorry if you really like Andrew Jackson. I do recognize his importance and I admire many things about him. I think my problem with Andrew Jackson, this probably tells you too much about me, is he's just not, I don't want to say a rule follower, because we shouldn't all be rule followers all the time. If things are wrong, you're supposed to change them, that sort of thing. But Jackson just kind of ignores the rules that are inconvenient for him. But I guess it's practical, right? It's practical. All right. And there's the whole Trail of Tears thing. Now, I will also note that the whole Trail of Tears thing, again, it's clearly heinous, and there were not very many voices in opposition to it during that era. So I think it's a good reminder to us that when stuff's clearly heinous in our time period, we should probably examine it and perhaps try to change it. And I guess the tricky part is when most people don't agree that something's clearly heinous, and then 100 years later, we look back and go like, oh, what were we thinking? So it's hard to think outside of our time period, apparently. All right, business. So in this era, you start to see a change in what is defined as democracy. Really during the Jeffersonian era, the ideal person to vote for was the most moral, most ethical, most prepared, most experienced person. And I think we go through trends like that in more modern politics as well. And then we go like, no, let's just get a different kind of guy. I think Trump is probably a version of that. It's part of why Trump liked to compare himself to Jackson and had photos. No, they didn't have photos back then. Portraits of Jackson in his office, that sort of thing. He said that was his favorite president. And as far as what they have in common, not probably as much as Trump thought, but they do have some things in common. They do. Jackson's an unusual fellow who really didn't fit the mold of the presidents during that time period. And I think in that way, they do have a lot in common. Yeah. No, they have some things. And Jackson didn't necessarily, it's early for tweets, so they didn't do that. But in his earlier years, he would challenge people to duels pretty regularly. So I think that was, oh, who was the senator from Missouri? It was Thomas Hart Benton that said that nobody could be in fashion who said that he hadn't had a duel with Andrew Jackson. And I think Benton was the one who actually had the duel with Jackson, and actually shot Jackson. And the bullet came out later in his life. It was lodged somewhere and then worked its way out of his body. So, and I guess he offered to return it. And then I think it was Benton, who was the guy that dueled with him, said something like, possession's 9/10 of the law. You've had it for 30 years. It's yours. So there you go. My goodness. All right. So back to business. Yeah, Jefferson, not so much into duels. Clearly his vice president. Did we even talk about that? Cried. I never mentioned that Aaron Burr shot Alexander Hamilton. How did you guys let me get away with that? Jeez. All right. I feel like I need to mention that. Or maybe I did. But you know that Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton had had a feud for a really long time, that when Hamilton and Burr were tied for the presidency because of procedural issues, which they cleared up, in subsequent elections, Hamilton spoke forcefully in favor of choosing Jefferson over Burr because he said Burr was a scoundrel and he was, unethical, that sort of thing. So that seemed to upset Burr for some reason, but he'd already been upset. I mean, this was not like the first time he'd been mad at him. So he kind of held on to that for a while. He had been challenging Hamilton to a duel for a really long time, decades. And Hamilton's wife had essentially told him, don't do this. They had had a son who had died in a duel. So she was not interested in losing her husband that way. And their relationship was a little iffy at times, but that happens from time to time in many marriages, probably not for the same reasons. But so eventually Hamilton just agreed to the duel. And there's several different stories about the duel. They meet in New Jersey because it's still legal to duel in New Jersey during that time period. I'm not saying it is now, although you never know. I saw that Jersey Shore show back in the day. But there you go to Weehawken, New Jersey. And you got to remember that Hamilton had served in the military with Washington. So Hamilton was very familiar with weapons, that sort of thing. So that's why I don't so much subscribe to the weapon misfired story, because I know that stuff can happen, but he's definitely going to check that out before he uses it. And the way duels work, not that I was there, in those days, but I've read about this some more than the average person. And apparently with the duel, you do like a coin flip or something at the beginning, and whoever wins the coin flip gets the first shot. And it's not like football where you defer. If you get the first shot in a duel, it's a huge advantage. So Hamilton won the whatever, coin flip, roll of the die, whatever. So he gets to shoot first. And so he chooses to shoot straight in the air. That's the story that I would subscribe to. The other story is it misfires. And if you shoot straight in the air, what that's supposed to mean is, I appreciate that you were man enough to come to the duel. I respect your honor. It's preserved. Let's not kill each other. And apparently in duels as well, sometimes it was cooler not to kill the opponent, but to wing him, like shoot him in the arm or the leg. So that way for the rest of his life, you could go like, you know why that guy has that limp? And that was me. So apparently that was kind of more the goal in a duel than we expect. So Hamilton shoots straight up in the air, which is the signal like, I don't want to shoot you. Maybe we shouldn't shoot each other. This is kind of ridiculous, but I do respect that you were brave enough to come to the duel. And then Burr gets his turn and just shoots him in the chest. So, and they didn't have witnesses because they didn't want them to get in trouble. but their assistants, the guys who hold the guns for them, I guess gave them the guns and then turned or something. So the stories are a little iffy. And then Hamilton was taken to the doctor, and then died pretty quickly after that. Now, Aaron Burr, they did try to impeach him, but not so much for that, but for trying to start his own country out of a little chunk of the Louisiana Purchase. So Burr apparently was a little iffy. Now, there's also, if you are interested in stuff like this, a Society of Burr Defenders. They have some website or something. I looked that up one time. And they like to talk about how he was big into women's rights, which he might have been, but he did also shoot Hamilton, which, you know, it's going to get you noted in history. And he won't ever be impeached, but then he's disgraced because he tried to start his own country. Yeah. And then that's kind of the end of his political career. All right. So, Burr shooting Hamilton. My goodness. Sorry. All right. Back to business. So, in the Jeffersonian days, with the exception apparently of Burr, we wanted to pick somebody more ethical, moral, more prepared than we were to represent us. And then in the Jacksonian era, we kind of got to this thing. It's like, no, I want the guy who's more like me. Sort of, we have these moments in modern history as well, where reporters would present it as, who would you like to more have a beer with? You know, who would you rather sit down and talk with? Who would you rather hang out with? That sort of thing. And that may be a little more where they moved during the Jacksonian era, although Jackson in the wrong mood, you probably wouldn't want to hang out with. So the value of the experience of the common man or the self-made man over somebody who grew up with wealth and privilege. So, and that of course is where part of the comparison between Trump and Jackson doesn't work as well, recognizing that, you know, Trump only had a small loan of $1 million from his dad to start his business. Now, I realize, you know, he made it into a much bigger business. Jackson started off life as an orphan in poverty. And yeah, he also kind of helped in the American Revolution, got caught as a teenager trading spy notes for the American side. And then for when he got caught, they sliced his face. That's why he was really proud of the big scar on his face, because he got it in the American Revolution as a kid. So Jackson has a legitimate kind of heroic sort of life story where he overcame a lot of difficulties. His father died early. His mother served as a medic or a nurse in the American Revolution. She helped the soldiers who got smallpox. Then she also got smallpox and died. And that left Andrew Jackson and his younger brother kind of on their own as like 15, 16-year-old kids. So yeah, he's a tough dude. And he's going to run against John Quincy Adams in 1924. And he's going to talk about how soft John Quincy Adams is and how weak he is, and he grew up in privilege, that sort of thing. And Jackson's nature's noble man, and John Quincy Adams just some fluffy dude that went to Yale. I think he went to Yale. Yeah. All right. And his dad was president. Now, John Quincy Adams was a very learned fellow, an accomplished man. He'd been an ambassador in his 20s and served in Congress for a long time. So, I mean, it's not that he was a slacker, but he's, you know, from a family that didn't need to work for a living. And that, of course, was not what Andrew Jackson's background was. Jackson had military background, you know, had struggled, first president born in a log cabin, that sort of thing. All right. Also, we're going to have a discussion about the meaning of citizenship during this time period. And what Foner will point out is that citizenship in this era is best defined as being a person who has the right to vote. Because if you can't vote, you're not represented. And they consider the right to vote or the franchise to be universal during this era, because they either don't have any property requirements at all, or they've lessened them to the point that really pretty much anyone can qualify. So during this era, they consider that they have universal manhood suffrage, um, which is not exactly what they have. It mostly means all white guys can vote. So even really poor white guys can vote, and all white guys can vote. And you're going like, yeah, that leaves out most of us in class, all of us that are female and all of us that are non-white guys. And yes, it does. But for that era, that's better than most of the world. I know. I know. We got to put it in the era. And you're going like, wow, yes. Yeah. No, we weren't big into it's the 1830s. Yeah, equal rights is not really. Yeah, that's just equal rights for whatever the dominant culture happens to be in that region. So, yeah. And one of the fun things about studying, other cultures is they tend to be, every bit as prejudiced as is our founding culture. Yeah. So there you go. Something nice and universal about prejudice, I guess. Now, I was reading. I'm sure I shouldn't reveal content or anything, but I was grading some stuff, and it's funny because people were talking about native groups before European exploration, and about how they were, apparently they were just really peaceful and they all loved each other. And it's like, did you even read about the Aztecs? But I get it. I mean, I know what they're trying to say, but it's like, yeah. Okay. So, um, universal manhood suffrage is not exactly universal manhood suffrage. Good for the era, but it would not be acceptable in the modern era, of course. So who's excluded from the expansion of democracy? Women and not white guys. I feel like we've made that point more than once. Society doesn't see them as equal intellectually, and for women in particular, they don't want to corrupt the moral influence of women upon society by introducing them to politics. We've been over that probably enough times that you're going like, yes, we know, don't say it again. Also during this era, there's a discussion of something called the American system. And the American system, this fellow Henry Clay, he's going to come up from time to time in this era. Henry Clay, we'll just highlight him there. Henry Clay is a senator, congressman, senator, from Kentucky, who's known in this era as the Great Compromiser. Now, I don't know if that seems like a good thing to you, but it meant he could build consensus. So he's going to be involved in writing Missouri Compromise. He writes the American System. He's going to kind of help negotiate some of the tariff difficulties that we'll hear about later on. And he also will help negotiate the Compromise of 1850. I'm not saying that there's a lot of greatness to any of those. A couple of those compromises we'll look at and you go like, that's not great at all. And you're right. But he's a consensus builder kind of guy. He also will run for president many times unsuccessfully. But he's pretty well respected in his era. Excuse me. The American system was the idea that we would create an internal home market so that we would try to buy our manufactured goods from manufacturers in the United States. And the problem with that was that we didn't have manufacturers within the United States. So the system would devise a level of tariff that would help to support the production or the development of those manufacturing businesses within the United States. Southern farmers were not very keen on this. They were completely content with importing goods from England because they didn't feel like the tariffs helped their cash crops anyway. So why would they want to support Northern manufacturing? It's probably not quite that simple, but it's pretty close. So, but the idea of the American system, it would be an economic plan that required intervention from the federal government to build roads, bridges, railroads, canals, to connect markets, use tariffs to finance manufacturing, and have a fully functioning home market to reduce our dependence on European goods. The system maintains incomplete because Jackson, who's president for 8 of those years, and then Van Buren for 4 after that, not interested. Yeah, they hate the national bank. And Jackson's goal in part is going to be to destroy the national bank. Yeah, and we'll talk about that. Yeah, clearly it's coming. All right. McCulloch versus Maryland. Seems like we go over a lot of these cases more than once. So probably just an idea that they established some principles of law that are probably important. They also really contradict the principles of law that the Jackson administration would like to have. So it's this conflict that you see between the court and the presidency, which is maybe unusual, maybe. I don't know, do you see that in the modern era, conflict between the executive branch and the court? Maybe from time to time. I know that I think where you saw it most vocally, oddly enough, was probably in the Obama administration. So when at the State of the Union, if the president didn't like a Supreme Court ruling, he would include it in part of his State of the Union address, which is kind of a no-go before that. You know, presidents didn't typically do that. So it was out of the norm of the political etiquette for State of the Union addresses. So Jackson would have supported that. That's probably one way that Obama was like Jackson. There are not very many ways, but there's one. All right. So McCulloch versus Maryland, that's the court case about the state of Maryland wanting to tax the branch of the National Bank that was in Baltimore, and the federal court said, no, you can't do that. So the reason this matters, and it goes back again to the National Bank, which is going to be a Jacksonian theme. So it's why we're going over this stuff more than once, okay? The ruling's important for a couple of reasons. Federal law, when there's a conflict between federal and state law, always wins. This, I think, is something interesting for us to remember as states make certain things legal that the federal government has not made legal. You know what I'm talking about. So marijuana, things like that. I think is it in Oregon where they've made certain quantities or weights, or I don't know how you measure drugs. I think even heroin or cocaine or something legal in certain amounts. That's the word that I was looking for. But the federal government hasn't agreed with that. So, you know, on the odd chance that the DEA gets mad at Colorado or something and goes in there and says, give me those gummy bears, it could be an interesting court case. I'm waiting for that court case because of McCulloch versus Maryland, which establishes the supremacy of federal law over states. So even if your state says marijuana is okay, if the federal law doesn't, there's potentially a problem there. That's not why we're really talking about this, but I'm just trying to point out this stuff still relevant. And number two, which is less relevant because we're down with the national bank or the Fed system now. It reaffirms the constitutionality of the national bank, either directly or indirectly or implicitly, because they didn't say bank's not legal, so we don't care. The reason that matters is Jackson is going to believe that the national bank is unconstitutional, and he is going to believe that his opinion about that matters more than the Supreme Court's opinion. There you go. There you are. Okay. Yeah. Well, he did serve as a judge. Yeah. And he would occasionally threaten to shoot people. It was a criminal court. He was a criminal court judge. All right. Missouri Compromise. Missouri Compromise. This is really important. Let me scroll down for just a second. I wanted to check on something. Apologies. Oh, wow. Okay. Sorry, the oh wow was for my brain, not for anything here. Missouri Compromise. Missouri wanted to join the Union. Missouri, as I sometimes call it, the great state of Missouri, because that's where I'm from, wanted to join the Union. They decided this, or the country, they decided this in 1819. It's like, we got enough folks, we qualify, we're making application. And they applied as a slave state, because you had to say, in the application, if you were going to have slaves or not have slaves. Now, Missouri would make, I don't remember how many states, but it would not be an even number. Having an even number of states that were, slave or free really mattered to folks during this time period, because upsetting the balance would give somebody the advantage in the Senate. Now, free states are always going to have the advantage in the House, because that's where you're represented by population, and there's more folks in the North. Even with the 3/5 compromise, it still doesn't get the South to even, not even close. So the North is always going to have the advantage in the House, but the Senate, the South at least wants to maintain a tie in the Senate. The North feels the same way as well. They wouldn't want the South to have an advantage there, because remember, in the Senate, you get to serve 6-year terms. You get to approve presidential appointments. I mean, there are lots of powers that the Senate has that the House doesn't have. So maintaining a balance of power in the Senate really matters to both slave and free states. Having Missouri as a slave state would upset that balance in the favor of the South. Yes, of the South. So the North said, let's not have Missouri come in as a slave state. This fellow, James Talmadge, adds an amendment, often referred to as the Talmadge Amendment, that said Missouri can only come into the Union if they have a provision for gradual emancipation. It means they can start out as a slave state, but they have to become a free state. And this is how most northern states had gotten rid of slavery, through gradual emancipation. And gradual emancipation is what it sounds like. Slaves gradually become free. It's not like you're partly free this day and then you're 3/4 free and then you're completely free. They either set a date, like on January 1st of 1822, everyone will be free. Or they say every person who's currently a slave will be free on their 21st birthday. So that clearly is giving the slave owner a chance to adjust to the new status. Clearly, slaves were not needing that time. It's like, no, I'm not quite ready to be free. Give me a few years. No, that is definitely not how that was working. So when you see gradual emancipation, you've got to think to yourself, that's good, but that extra time benefits the slave owner. So gradual emancipation, still better than no emancipation, but that's a sign that there's some sort of compromise going on within that state government that gives some sort of allowance, I guess, for the slave owner. But anyway, that's you're about to see a pretty big debate between people who want gradual and immediate emancipation, because if slavery's wrong, then you should end it now. You shouldn't go like, that's really wrong, but let's do it for 2 more years. So anyway, back to business. I'm sorry, I got distracted on gradual emancipation. You guys are probably going like, yeah, you get distracted from time to time, but it always is important. Not always. Yeah, like Obama, getting mad at John Roberts that one year. I was entertained by that. But anyway, the Talmadge Amendment is not accepted by Missouri. Missouri goes like, no, Talmadge, we are going to be a slave state. You can't tell us what to do, that sort of thing. So Missouri rejects that, and then there's continued discussion. What brokers the discussion and kind of solves the compromise is when Maine applies as a state. And I know some of you are like, well, Maine's not a state yet. I know, I'm shocked as well. Maine is not a state yet. Maine was owned by, it was a territory of Massachusetts, which I know doesn't make a lot of sense because they're not exactly contiguous, but Maine becomes its own state during this time period. And clearly Maine is going to be a free state. So because of where it is, and it's Maine, so it's going to be a free state. So when Maine's application is received and they want to come in as a free state, then the Missouri Compromise is drawn up. And here are the provisions of the Missouri Compromise, which you'll want to know, because I suspect it'll be on a quiz, which might go live tomorrow at this evening, tomorrow, 12:01. I would probably wait till after class on Thursday to take it, but you've already taken quizzes, so you know what to do. All right, so Missouri Compromise. Missouri is a slave state, Maine is a free state, and they don't want to have this argument anymore. So they said all the new territory, because there's a bunch of new territory, and there's going to be a bunch of new states from the Louisiana Purchase. All of the new territory, everything below the 3630 line, which is the southern border of Missouri, if you need that for reference, everything below that line would automatically be admitted as a slave state, and everything above that line would be automatically admitted as a free state. So that way we don't have to have this argument anymore. Kind of looks like there's an even amount of territory above and below the line. That's of course pre-Mexican War. That's when it all gets stirred up again, which is in the 1840s, in case you're keeping track. So this will kind of keep us in a holding pattern from 1820. Is Missouri Compromise 1820 or 21? I think it's 20. Yeah, 1820. Because Missouri becomes a state in 21. Pretty sure about it. But the resulting Missouri Compromise will kind of leave this uneasy peace for a little while. Oh, and by the way, Missouri said no free blacks can live in our state. And that was kind of a trend of new slave states, because they're noticing that having free blacks in the state with slaves makes slaves want to be free blacks. Yeah, they want to be free. And also you'll notice occasionally there's some rebellions that happen that may be fomented by a combination of current and former slaves. Yeah, you'll notice that. Okay. Jefferson and John Quincy Adams are going to make statements during the completion of the Missouri Compromise that will suggest. John Quincy Adams, by the way, is Monroe's, what is he? Secretary of State. I know that you know that. Me too. I knew it as well. This discussion's going on during Monroe's presidency. Yeah, the Missouri Compromise, because Adams gets elected in 24 to the presidency. Okay. And John, who's this fellow? Jefferson's still alive. Jefferson and Adams, John Quincy Adams' dad, John Adams, live for quite a while. They both die on the same day, I think, let's see, 76, so 1826, the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, well, sort of signing of the Declaration of Independence. They both died on July 4th, is what I'm saying. Yeah, okay. Which is very patriotic of them. I know, go founding fathers. All right, but both Jefferson and Adams see that slavery is the big problem that's going to potentially lead to a civil war if we don't solve it. So they're going to urge that current generation of politicians to begin solving the problem. And the way they solved the problem was, let's make a line, everything above that can be free and everything below that can be slave, which is why these guys made that comment. They said, if you don't fix this, you're gonna destroy the country. You're gonna have a civil war. And they're gonna continue to urge current politicians to solve the problem. John Quincy Adams will be one of those current politicians that will try to solve the problem without a lot of success. Yeah. So you know how it ends up. You heard about the Civil War. All right. During Monroe's presidency, we sometimes refer to this as the era of good feelings, because all politicians got along. Okay. Has that ever happened in your memory? Do all politicians get along? I don't know. I know you, I've already mentioned, I live in the fine city of Leander. Our local politicians don't get along. I'm sure they do in Cedar Park. I know. which is my adjacent city. I know in Austin they do. Okay. Yeah, nobody's politicians get along, do they? All right. Maybe in Canada, probably not even in Canada. But it's called the Era of Good Feelings because the Federalists are gone. So, except for John Marshall, and he doesn't fight with people. He just, hangs out on the Supreme Court. So Monroe's presidency is referred to as the Era of Good Feelings because the Federalist Party dissolved and we really just have the Republicans left. Now, the Republicans are dividing into factions because it's inevitable. I guess it's just what happens. So they're really not as peaceful as the name might suggest. And they have more progressive factions, less progressive factions. They've got the old traditional faction represented by Monroe and the more progressive faction represented by John Quincy Adams. So Adams is the Secretary of State for Monroe. He'd served as a congressman and an ambassador to Russia. So he's an experienced fellow, even though he's not super old, but he's old enough at this point. How old do you have to be president? It's not that old. 35? Those of you who are teenagers go like 35 is really old. It is not. Don't be like that. I don't know. 35 is president. Ooh. I think about what my views were at 35. It's like, I don't know, man. It's probably good for all of us. I wasn't president. Still is good for us that I'm not president. All right. So John Quincy Adams, Secretary of State, and he wants to consolidate national power in the Western Hemisphere and also keep us out of the forming of alliances back in Europe. So he's gonna two birds, one stone with the Monroe Doctrine. So he's going to, at the behest or at least agreement of James Monroe, devise, compose the Monroe Doctrine, which essentially is a ban on European colonies in the Western Hemisphere. Now, we conveniently issued this ban as most of the colonies in the Western Hemisphere that are European are dissolving. So it's like, oh, all the Spanish republics are dissolving and France and England are essentially out. Okay, let's ban future colonies in the Western Hemisphere. So the timing is nice. We can ban stuff that probably is going away anyway, and also send a little warning to our European friends, don't come back. We're probably a little more worried about colonies in the West or Latin America. And we're a little worried about Russia because Adams had that background. But at this point, European nations are probably not looking to colonize that far away. They're probably headed to Asia or Africa, which you will certainly see a lot in the 1800s and beyond. But we're still going to issue the warning. So here we go. So we want to separate the old and new worlds as the West and at the Western Hemisphere. So we're going to ban future European colonization in the Western Hemisphere in exchange for our promise to stay out of your business. It's like, we'll not intervene in the East, in your side of the world, and you need to stay out of our side of the world. And Europe is like, that's cute. I mean, they really don't care that we issue this. We're really proud of it. It's like, yeah, we made our statement. We showed them who we are, that sort of thing. The issue at this point is we don't have a navy really to speak of. I mean, we have a little navy and we could defeat somebody else with a little navy. If we had naval battles with Spain or France or England, it would not go well during this era. It just wouldn't. So issuing this is not really a threat to European nations. It's a nice policy statement for us, which will kind of dust off when we build a world-class navy and go like, hey, remember that? Sorry, stuff's popping up on my screen there. That it was not. Does it show when stuff pops up on my screen, or does just the document show? I wonder things like this. You don't have to answer that. But if you do, I'll know you're paying attention. And I clearly was distracted by the little pop-up thing. All right. Oh, good. Here's an answer. All right. Oh, that's good. Okay. Yeah. No, that's good because probably I wouldn't want all those messages to show up. Because what if it said something? No, I'm kidding. I don't have many secrets. I had a student last semester. It was kind of funny and then not. You know how you log in and to Zoom and you may or may not be muted. He's the reason that I found the setting to make sure. I should have done it when I had that married couple that fought every morning, and we got to hear that at the beginning of class. But I had this student who was logging on and he was telling his friend how much he hated the class because I was so stupid and gave such terrible lectures, and he's not on mute. So it's like I wouldn't have had any messages like that show up. That was pretty entertaining. Yeah, and then he emailed me later to justify why he said that. It's like, okay, buddy. All right, back to the Monroe Dome. Sorry, it was very entertaining. Yeah, but I liked it the best that he emailed later and said, you know, I probably shouldn't have said that, but you know it's true. You are a terrible professor. And I went, okay then. So good job, buddy. All right. So Western Hemisphere, we're banning them. They're not entertained at all. Our goal in this, in part, is to get out of the choosing of alliances that Europe is trying to force us into during this time period. So we're just saying, like, we'll stay in our corner, you stay in yours, and we're going to defend our corner. And Europe's not, you know, there's no European nation that's quaking. It's like, oh my gosh, the United States just threatened us. But it's part of why we issued the Monroe Doctrine in this era, is to explain to them that we're staying out of your little alliance game. So in that way, yes, they're following Washington's advice. Yeah, you guys were upset about this. They don't follow Washington's advice. Yeah, I don't know if the student who made those comments did very well. The truth is, I didn't try to track his grades because I wanted to be fair. But, but to be fair though, I am a terrible professor. I did save that email. I may frame that someday. All right. We were really proud of the Monroe Doctrine. That made us feel good. It's like, woohoo, we tied the War of 1812, so a win. And we've got the Monroe Doctrine. We are ready to go. Plus, now we're going to go harass some folks in Latin America, potentially, not just yet, but we kind of issued our statement of controlling Latin America, when we're able to. Yeah, it'll happen later. Yeah. Oh, goodness. So Republicans. So now the Republicans are going to split. Not everything lasts forever. So we don't have this one happy party. Honestly, we never really had the one happy party. But what you'll notice is that there's more of a nationalist policy among certain Republicans. Madison and Monroe are okay with the national road. They're going to talk about the American system. It ultimately doesn't get approved, but they're at least going to entertain it. They have no problem rechartering the national bank, which the more Republican faction under, in the Jefferson, not Hamilton, but Jefferson era, when Jefferson and Hamilton and Madison were arguing, did not favor the national bank, creation of the national bank. This new iteration of the Republican Party goes like, national bank, we can live with that. So these guys are a little different. They've kind of seen, can I say the word efficacy? They've seen the efficacy of the national bank. They see that it has a useful purpose. The efficacy, that sounded cooler, right? Okay. So part of the Republicans have really kind of turned into these national Republicans. Who maybe want a more interventionist foreign policy, or even though we're staying out of Europe, we might want to intervene in Latin America if that seems profitable to us. We're going to build national projects that might enhance the national economy. We might not be so averse to manufacturing or the national bank. Okay, so the conflict is going to get stronger as time goes along. And the election in 1824, you really just have the Republican Party. Yeah. But you're going to start to see that division that happens in this era. There are 5 people that run for president. I think one of them dies. right around election time. So he doesn't win. He wasn't going to win anyway. I think that one was Crawford. Was that his last name? But there's 4 people left who have electoral votes and popular votes. The top 2 vote getters are John Quincy Adams, who's number 2, and number 1 was Andrew Jackson. Now, none of them had a majority. So if there's not a majority of popular votes, then if the Electoral College can't solve the issue, it ends up going to the House of Representatives. So we got to figure out what to do. Some of the lower vote getting guys like Henry Clay are going to tell their electors, why don't you, instead of voting for me because I can't win, vote for John Quincy Adams because he's more reasonable, he's a little less unpredictable than Andrew Jackson. That's kind of where the electors went. So they ended up voting for John Quincy Adams, even though Andrew Jackson had more popular votes. But Henry Clay asked his electors to support John Quincy Adams because he agreed with more of those policies, saw him as a little more rational and reasonable, that sort of thing. I don't think John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay hung out together, that sort of thing. I don't think they were best buds, but he did see him as potentially a better, more solid, more predictable, rational leader than Andrew Jackson. And a little tricky because Jackson, where's Jackson from? Kentucky? No, Tennessee. Where are they from? Yeah, Tennessee. And then Henry Clay's from Kentucky. So they're neighbors, kind of, sort of. Yeah. All right. But this will really upset Andrew Jackson, as you might imagine. And he's going to lead the charge that John Quincy Adams' presidency is illegitimate, that he was selected and not elected. And it's going to be a little messy. And it is going to be kind of tricky for Adams to get things passed that he wants to get passed because there's so much political debate outside of the presidency and in the Congress that the Adams presidency is not legitimate. He doesn't have popular support. So people are not really willing to stand up for the programs that he wants to accomplish, and he'll be a one-term president. So the main things that John Quincy Adams wants to do during his presidency, which is the one term, he wins in 24, so it's 25, 26, 27, and 28. Yeah, so the next election will be in 28. He'll run for re-election and lose. Main things he wants to do really focus on national programs, excuse me, things like the strengthening the national bank, something like an American system for the economy, and create a system of national universities and science observatories to enhance higher education, which is not a big thing during this era, so it's kind of an unusual goal. And none of these goals are popular in the era that Adams is president, because this is the era of the common man, the self-made man, the pull yourself up by your own bootstraps kind of man. And that man doesn't need the national road or the national bank, or he doesn't need to go to some fancy college or any college, because, you know, it's that era where you don't go to college. So there you go. So Adams is really out of his time period. Yeah, he's either too late or too early. So he's not going to have much success at the things that he wants to accomplish. What you will start to see develop is something like a spoils system and party loyalty as these splits start to develop. So the spoils system is the idea that you get an appointment from a politician because you supported him. You won't really see that in the Adams era so much. You've certainly seen it before. You'll certainly see it after. It's really often associated with the Jackson era, but it's not an unusual political technique to give your supporters jobs because they supported you, not necessarily because they're the best person for the job. So, you know, this was a different era as well. So you might appoint well, like Jackson's going to appoint somebody to the Supreme Court. No, that they rejected as Secretary of the Treasury. It's like, I will just keep trying until I find an office where you will approve him. But they didn't necessarily have to have a background in what it was they were being appointed to. They just needed to be confirmed. So, and there are certain types of jobs you didn't even need confirmation for. You just got in. So, goodness. All right. And this will lead to some reforms later, but much later, like 1302 kind of later. Okay. All right. Jackson as president. What you'll see with Jackson is the development of a second party. Yeah, so you have a new political party because people dislike Jackson so much. They just create a party, and the one thing they have in common is they all hate Andrew Jackson. It's like, let's make a political party. Sorry, I'm getting a mint. Let's make a political party. Yeah, what do we base it on? Well, don't you hate Jackson? Yeah, I hate Jackson. Me too. All right, that's enough. Can you imagine? I don't know, some of you are like, yeah, I can imagine. It happens sometimes. So, the Whigs hate Andrew Jackson. And this is a reform party in England. So the Reform Party in the United States, the We Hate Andrew Jackson Party, took their name, and the things they had in common. They hated Andrew Jackson, and they thought the government, the federal government, should serve as the power behind the positive liberal state. And you're going like, what the heck is that? It's the idea that the federal government should, when you see positive or negative when they're talking about law or political philosophy, positive means you do stuff, and negative means that you stay out of stuff. I don't know if that helps or not, but positive means you get in there and you start programs. Like if you see that there's a problem, you go like, yeah, we've got the power. We're going to create policy. We're going to create an agency. We're going to fix that. We got to get in there. And if you believe in a negative liberal state, you think that the government's supposed to set up, it's a little more like libertarian, I suppose, where they're supposed to set up certain boundaries, maybe defend the borders, make sure people don't kill each other, but sort of let the states and the individuals hammer out the rest. It's like, there's a problem, the people will recognize it and fix it. Yeah. So one, you have a lot of faith in government, and one, you have a lot of faith in individuals. And yeah, okay. I think, I don't know where most people land on that. I know in Texas, we tend to have more faith in the individual, I suppose. Yeah, it's kind of why we vote the way we do. Except in Austin. Yeah. I was listening to the news this morning, and they're talking about reparations in Austin. It's like, well, yeah, Austin's the place where they'd be talking about that. That is an interesting idea. All right. So interesting stuff. And what I've always marveled about in Texas politics is how a lot of times the politicians in Texas just do stuff and they say, well, this would be good for our state. You know, we'll think about state policies. And then sometimes they get there and they go like, dang, we hate Austin. Let's pass some bills to tell Austin you can't do what you want to do. It's like, do you do that? Do you have any anti-Houston bills or anti-San Antonio bills? But, you know, Austin's a different, you know, it's a different kind of city. It is. It's where we have actual Democrats. That's what I would tell my high school students. There are actual Democrats in Austin. The rest of the place, they're just kind of left-leaning Republicans who act as Democrats in Texas. All right, too many political perspectives there. So the Whigs, those would be, you know, what we think of as, I don't know what we think of as progressives, probably. People who want to use the power of the government to make change. And the Jacksonian guys are going to say the government should stay out of stuff and let individuals and states make whatever changes they view necessary, closer to home, that sort of thing. All right. So Jackson and states' rights and nullification. Oh my gosh, there's a lot of stuff coming up here. Democrats, Jacksonian Democrats are more proponents of states' rights. more likely to oppose the national bank federal intervention into anything and everything. They think that that's a bad idea. When the national government passes a law that the state disagrees with, Jacksonians think the state should have a right to refuse to enforce that law. And they'll go back to Jefferson and Madison and say, like, Kentucky and Virginia resolutions against the Alien and Sedition Acts. You know, if it was good enough for the founding fathers, it's good enough for us. There you go. And the one law that they are really going to be upset about is the 1828 tariff, which is sometimes called the Tariff of Abominations. And, you know, I always think it's funny. We don't know anything about this tariff except it's terrible. And it's just gonna do what most tariffs do during that time period. Raise, let me try again. Raise taxes on imported manufactured goods, and it's trying to get the South to purchase manufactured goods from made in the North. And Northern manufacturing is moving at a pretty slow pace during this time period. So the things that they're manufacturing aren't necessarily of high quality all the time because they're new at this, and they tend to be more expensive because they're new at this and they're not making as many things. So our European friends kind of have manufacturing down a little better than we do during this era. So the tariffs during this era are really trying to force the South to buy Northern manufactured goods by making European manufactured goods more expensive. Yeah. And they really aren't helpful at supporting Southern agriculture. Northern agriculture is not as much of an export kind of agriculture. I was just thinking about this because we always talk about tariffs and we say it harms Southern agriculture and helps Northern business. And that is generally true with tariffs. But then it sort of leaves out, I think it leads into that misconception that students have that they don't grow anything in the North. It's just what they grow in the North is more for the home market. It's food. Yeah, food for you, food for your cattle. So we grow a lot of food in the United States. We still do. We could feed the entire world with the food that we grow. Not that the entire world wants to eat corn and wheat. Many cultures don't. But if they had to, in a pinch, we could feed everybody and they'd probably get a hamburger as well. And they're also starting to see a development of a cattle market and that sort of stuff during this era. It's small, but it's getting there. So the food really is grown in the North. The Southern, what the South is growing in the 1800s. You know what they're growing, and we export that a lot because we don't have so many textile mills. Not that we don't use some of that in the United States. That would be cotton. I didn't even say it out loud, did I? So cotton is really a big export crop, and Southerners also use Northern agriculture for food. I'm not saying they don't grow enough food for their own house, but they may not grow enough for their entire state or something like that. So food is more Northern agriculture. Cotton is more Southern agriculture. It's a huge generalization, which mostly work. And then most of the manufacturing is done in the North. The tariffs support internal home manufacturing at the expense of Southerners who like to import the manufactured goods from England and France. I'm not saying Northerners don't like to import that stuff as well, because if it's cheaper and it works better, consumers are consumers no matter what era it is. If it's cheaper and it works better, we'd probably rather have that no matter where it's built, no matter what we say, like, I want to buy American, unless American's more expensive, and then I want to buy something else. So that's kind of where they're at during this era. But the tariffs help the North more because more of the manufacturing's in the North. All right, I'm going to stop talking about that. So this tariff happens in 1828, and South Carolina is in particular incensed about it, in part because they have a lot of plantations there, and those guys are their politicians. So Jackson, who is a plantation owner, thinks that the authority of the national government is supreme. So if he wants to enforce the tariff, then he's going to enforce the tariff. So when South Carolina says, we're not going to pay the tariff, Jackson's going to disagree with them because this is a law that was passed by the Congress and signed by the president, not him, not him, not him, no. And there are ways to fix this. So you refusing to pay a tariff, you know, to the extent that you might raise an army to resist it. Jackson says, I will be just like George Washington. He likes to make comparisons between himself and George Washington because he's a military president as well. So it's like, you reject me, you're rejecting George Washington. He makes that comparison a lot, which he thinks works for him. I don't know. People liked, I mean, we elect him twice and elect his vice president once. So he's very popular in his era. So he's going to favor collection of this tariff, even though he doesn't like the tariff, because he thinks federal law is supreme. And also he's the head of the executive branch. And he thinks when he says something should be done, it needs to be done. So he insists on the passage of a Force Act, which is going to allow for enforcement of collection of the tariff. And he says, I will lead the army there myself. He says something like, and I will grab the first man that I find who resists the tariff and string him up to a tree with my own bare hands. So he wants to go, he'll go kill somebody who won't pay a tariff. He's ready to go enforce the law. Behind the scenes, you got Henry Clay working on a compromise tariff, which seems to be more reasonable, and the other states will agree to that. And so conflict avoided, go Henry Clay. And then after the compromise tariff is passed and then signed by the president, South Carolina nullifies the tariff and says, that's fine, or nullifies the Force Act. It's like, we didn't recognize the Force Act either. It's like, okay, South Carolina, you won, and now you want to, you know, stick your finger in Andrew Jackson's eye or something. I don't know. It's kind of weird. I would always tell my high school students, it was like, you know, when you, because you're younger than me, got put in timeout. Do you ever get put in timeout? And so your mom puts you in timeout, like, you need to sit here and think about what you did, or whatever mom says when you're in timeout. I'm from a different generation. We didn't get timeout. We got something else. And yeah, we didn't really think about what we did. We just got spanked. So your mom puts you there, and then she walks away, and you stick your tongue out at her. It's like, okay, kid, there you go. So South Carolina's sticking their tongue out at the federal government. It's a sign that South Carolina's got more rebellion in their future, for sure. All right. More stuff about, is there still more stuff? There's always more stuff about Jackson. All right, Jackson and natives. Now, I don't want you to think that I don't realize that Jackson isn't president in 1823. I know he's not president in 1823. I know that, I do. But I'm pointing out this ruling because it's going to affect some of the things that Jackson wants to do or thinks about with Native Americans. Now, Jackson is going to defend his position on Native Americans for a variety of reasons. His position is that it's okay to remove them from the East and send them to reservations in the West, because one, everybody wants it done, and that's it, just one. And when people go like, well, you must be some kind of racist, turdy president kind of dude, he was like, no, I'm Andrew Jackson. I fought with Native Americans at the Battle of New Orleans, which is true. So it's like, I'm not racist. I just want to remove a whole bunch of people from their rightful land. So, because it's good economic policy. All right. But in 1823, Cherokee Nation kind of, you know, they saw the writing on the wall, as it were, and they said, well, I guess we got to get on board with this constitutional government sort of thing. So we are going to write our own constitution. We are going to, if something happens with the US government that causes us grief, we're going to appeal to their governmental systems. So the Cherokee Nation goes to the Supreme Court several times. So they're going to appeal some taxation attempts from the state of Georgia in 1823. And in the midst of that ruling, there's an opinion stated that the natives don't technically own their land, but they have a right to occupancy, and that the US government has a conservatorship that they've agreed to and can't really remove. And then in 1831, that is when Andrew Jackson's president. After the Supreme Court after the Congress has decided to pass the Indian Removal Act in 1831, Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, the court says natives are not technically citizens, but wards of the state, and their rights must be protected by the state. And then in Worcester versus Georgia, they have a national heritage, they have treaties, they have a contract, they have a right to maintain possession of their land and cannot be involuntarily removed. So these series of court cases suggest, and then with that last one, strongly suggest that what Congress is going to do or allow the state of Georgia to do in removing the Cherokee from Georgia is illegal. Yeah. And Andrew Jackson doesn't care. So when the Congress passes the Trail of Tears, they pass the Indian Removal Act. They don't pass the Trail of Tears. But when they pass the Indian Removal Act, this gives the federal government, provides federal government funding, which is an interesting thing for a government that's supposed to be a negative liberal state, but provides federal government funding to remove natives from the Louisiana Purchase area to west of the Mississippi River, even though the Supreme Court has already said that in very specific instances, especially the Cherokee in Georgia, this is not legal. And the Trail of Tears does happen in 1837 and 1838. Andrew Jackson is either going to say the Supreme Court made the ruling, let them enforce it, or he's going to say something more like the Supreme Court ruling has arrived stillborn. I went to some conference where there was a guy who was digitizing Andrew Jackson's records and papers, and he says that the Supreme Court made the ruling, let the Supreme Court enforce it statement was really more legend, that the Supreme Court ruling has arrived stillborn was the actual quote. The meaning is the same. I'm not going to enforce the ruling. Oh, that's an interesting question. Is that ethnic cleansing? Yeah. Yes and no. I know this is not a good answer at all, but I'm gonna give it to you, because the goal of the act was not to kill Native Americans, but to remove them. So it's certainly removing their cultural heritage from the area that it belonged to. The plan is not to kill people. Understood that lots of folks die on the Trail of Tears. And certainly in enforcing the boundaries of reservations, a lot of Native Americans are going to die. So I think if you're going to look strictly at the purpose of the act, it's not exactly ethnic cleansing, but it would be hard to be a Cherokee and look at it and go like, no, that wasn't so bad. So I think it's in that nice gray area that laws often are in, where no, it's just, to give them a more safe place to, you're going to see similar, it feels a lot like, in the modern era when we do the Japanese relocation camps. It's like, no, it's in part to put them in a safer area where they won't be harmed by neighbors, they're more isolated, that sort of stuff. But certainly that's not exactly, what the law is doing. So I don't know that I have a good answer for you. Certainly some people are going to consider it ethnic cleansing. The purpose of the law is essentially to create a reservation system west of the Mississippi River. And then you know from US history that once we discover gold west of the Mississippi River, there's going to be more and more condensed reservation systems that are created. And very rarely are those reservations the land where the tribe originally started. So, you know, it's typically some land that we think nobody wants, no offense, Oklahoma. But I know one of my years in high school lived in Arizona. And, you know, there's several major cities in Arizona and then lots and lots of reservations between those major cities, essentially in desert land where you can't, you know, it's not productive land and it's not near good sources of water. So what you will notice if you look at most land that is part of a reservation system, it's usually about the least productive land in the region. And that's certainly not an accident. So I don't know if that was a good answer or not, but it was an answer. I know it sounds like I'm being a politician. I don't want to say yes or no, but I don't know. To me, yeah, it's kind of a gray area, but it's not a positive gray area. There's nothing good, you know, that no matter, there are going to be politicians during this era that are going to argue this is really for the best interest of the tribe, that sort of stuff. Nobody really thought that. People in Georgia wanted that land. Yeah. So they had been trying to kick the Cherokee out for years. I mean, clearly, because you've got a court case in the 1820s about it. And you remember too, when we talked briefly about the Jefferson presidency, and I know we mostly talked about Louisiana Purchase and Embargo Act, that kind of stuff, because those are the bigger things. He started talking about Indian policy during that era. And his idea was the one big reservation, which was similar stuff. Send the Native Americans to the West, because that way, you know, they're isolated from people in the East who want the land for farmland. And the reason they wanted to send them west of the Mississippi is they considered that the great American desert where stuff couldn't grow. And part of it is certainly, you know, the Great Plains turns into some really good farmland. So we'll take that away from Native Americans as well. And well, that's for the 1302 class, how that comes about. But, you know, whatever the government says is the reason that they're doing it, anything they say that makes it sound like it's paternalistic, it's not. You know that they just wanted the land because people in those states wanted the land. And the thought is if we just remove them to the West, they're no longer a problem. It's sort of like, it's the way that this era of politicians solves a lot of problems. With Missouri Compromise, it's like, oh, this slave-free thing, we can't really solve it. Let's just draw a line and everything above it's free and everything below it's slave. That'll solve the problem. So this era of politicians doesn't really solve problems, they defer them. That would be, and some of you are going like, isn't that what all politicians do? Maybe. Maybe it is, but this generation of politicians pretty notorious for it, and we end up with a civil war in part because of it. So, and maybe that's too much blame to give to these politicians, because I know as well that the founding father generation could have just sucked it up and said, you know what, slavery's wrong, we're ending it now. They could have, and it might have meant that the United States didn't unify and didn't win the revolution, that sort of stuff. And it might not have. You know, there's no way to know. So, all right, back to Jackson a little bit more, and then we'll look at the documents, the assignments for this chapter. Sorry, I didn't put those up first, but I didn't, did I? All right. On Species Circular and the Panic of 1837. This is one of the weirdest things, I think, in economic history. We don't really study economic history very much. Labor history is kind of handy in the modern era, but we really don't study economic history very much because it's not exciting. I don't know, but it's pretty influential stuff. So we already know Jackson hated the National Bank. He said it a bunch of times. We know that's not a secret. I'm the guy who runs the National Bank, president of the Bank of the US, boss, excuse me, is Nicholas Biddle, and he is, you know, a Northeastern educated, aristocratic kind of fellow, definitely not a self-made man. He's apparently quite good at investing, so the National Bank is doing pretty well. But it's that mix of public and private funds, and it seems to enhance the fortunes of people who have enough money to invest, and that tends to be wealthier people. I know in the modern era, more people are invested in the stock market. You know, I'll watch the news every once about the economy. And I mean, you all know how the economy is right now. There's lots of job openings, but those are job openings where you don't get paid a whole lot and the job isn't very exciting or fun. But, you know, everybody still needs a job because you got to pay for stuff. And then prices are going up, food prices and prices of stuff to fix your roof. That's also really expensive right now. But also gas prices. You've noticed that, and you and I noticed we don't fix our roofs very often, or you know, invest in the stock market very often. But we all buy gas, and we all buy food. So we're all noticing those prices going up, and our wages probably aren't. But then you'll watch like a financial channel, and they go like, "Oh, don't worry about it. The stock market's still robust, and the futures outlooks are good." That's good for people that can invest. That's not good for the average person. And even though the average person, maybe 50% of people in the country invest directly or directly in the stock market, pension plans, stuff like that. Most 50% don't. So Jackson is going to take the side of the 50% who don't. In this era, it's way more than 50% who don't have any interest in the national bank or stocks or things like that. So wealthy people are going to benefit from the national bank. Now, the truth is the federal treasury is going to benefit as well, because that mix of public-private money is going to increase the federal treasury as well. But it probably benefits wealthy people disproportionately because, you know, they own their own investment where the entire government owns. You know what I'm trying to say. Okay. So wealthy people are also going to make a lot of money off the national bank. And Jackson is just convinced that that is wrong. He thinks that it's beyond wrong, that it's unconstitutional. So when he gets reelected in 1832, by a large margin, he thinks that that also means the public agrees with him about the national bank, which I always think is fascinating when politicians get elected and they think, well, that means the public favors my policies. It probably means you did better in a debate, or you're taller, or, you know, who knows what it means, why we elect who we elect, or, you know, you're more aggressive, or you're not as jerky, or, you know, who knows? It depends on the election. But when Jackson got reelected, he was like, I knew the people agreed with my stance on the national bank. Let's kill it. So that's going to become one of his goals. Nicholas Biddle, who's the president of the bank, is well aware of this goal. And he says, you know what? I'm just going to ask Congress to recharter the bank a little early because if Andrew Jackson gains steam and, you know, I have to do this at the end of his term, it may not go so well. So I'll just ask now. And he asked the Congress to recharter the national bank, and it passes overwhelmingly. Not by 2/3, but overwhelmingly. And then Andrew Jackson vetoes the bill. And in his veto statement, he says he's vetoing the bill because he is the voice of the people. They voted for him. He believes the bank to be unconstitutional, and clearly the people agree with him. And the Supreme Court's going like, okay, buddy, there we go again. You know, what we say doesn't matter. So it sets one precedent that you don't want to overlook, is that twice Jackson has defied the Supreme Court. Twice Jackson has said, I don't care what the Supreme Court says. I know, you know, I say it's unconstitutional, or I say it is constitutional. We're going to do it. So he overrides the Supreme Court. In the modern era, this would get him impeached for sure. Well, should I say for sure? I don't know. Who can be sure about anything? But I do think that any president who just blatantly disregards a Supreme Court ruling, I think that's going to be a problem in the modern era. In this era, it's like, yeah, we like Jackson more than the Supreme Court. They really, yeah, didn't care so much. Now, Jackson will veto the bill, and then Congress is not able to override the bill. So then Jackson will proceed to get his Secretary of the Treasury nominee, who isn't yet confirmed, to take the national treasury out of the federal bank and distribute it to state banks that are referred to in this era as pet banks that are owned by Jackson's friends. And those banks will proceed to lose the money. Like, I don't mean like, oh, where is it? But they will make bad investments. They will make loans to friends, that sort of stuff that aren't repaid. And they actually deplete the national treasury. And Jackson's like, yeah, I don't care. At least the money's not in the national bank where it benefits wealthy people. This way it benefits people. It doesn't really benefit anybody. But Jackson's goal is to destroy the national bank. So he does that by withdrawing the funds from it while it's still chartered. So he vetoes the rechartering, and while it's still chartered, he takes all the money out of it and redistributes it to state banks who mismanage it, because banking regulations are not very firmly developed during this time period, honestly, not until the mid 1930s. So state banks tend to make riskier investments, loans, that kind of stuff. So that's what happens. All right, so then most of the money's depleted. And then Congress goes, dang, this Roger Taney fellow, looks like Taney, but Roger Taney, he's really not good at managing the money. We are not approving him for the Secretary of the Treasury. So he's withdrawn from that. And then he's put forward as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. I'm sure he'll be great at that as well. Or we'll talk about him later as Chief Justice. It's not one of the best historical appointments. We'll go with that. But yeah, historically, we look at some of his rulings and go, oh my. But Roger Taney, no longer going to be Secretary of the Treasury because of how he manages the money, but he does get confirmed as Chief Justice. The national Treasury continues to become depleted through mismanagement by state banks, issue of inflationary paper currency to finance Western land sales. And Jackson then issues a specie circular, which says that any of these loans that were issued have to be repaid in hard currency, specie, gold or silver. Nobody in the West has any gold or silver. So all these people default, not all, but most of them default on their loans. So all the loans are essentially lost. And then we go into a major, was a recession that turns into a depression known as the Panic of 1837. So this is going to be, we had one of these in 1819, and this is going to be, the 20-year version of a depression. It's going to be a pretty big one. So it's going to be a problem for the entire country. So the fight that Biddle and Jackson had over the bank will lead to this recession. Now, Biddle's going to counter with some unethical methods as well and unethical actions. So I'm not suggesting that Biddle is blameless in this. I'm just saying that Jackson's desire to destroy the national bank comes at the cost of a recession. And Biddle's desire to keep it and maybe do some unethical things in the process, like hiding some funds, that sort of thing. These two guys fight is going to lead to depression in the United States, which oddly enough is not going to hinder Jackson's popularity very much. And nobody knows who Biddle is, so, yeah, except Jackson. All right, let's peek at some more documents. Oh gosh, there's so much talk. Do you guys have any questions? Is there anything you want to ask? You're like, I'm just asking, will you stop talking soon? Yes, I will. And tomorrow to be a little shorter because, yeah, I got to record it kind of late. All right, let me find the question if I can find it. Do I want to save that? I don't know. Did I? Oh, all I did was highlight something. Sorry, I'm talking to myself, aren't I? All right, let's see. I want to open quiz review. And what else do we want to open? It's the wrong thing. We opened notes, document, thing. And what else do we want to open? Questions. That's what we want to open. Poop. Can I say poop in front of you? Why did Word have to die? Why did that happen? Unit 3 questions. There we go. All right. Let's look at Unit 3 questions. Where did you guys go? You're gone. I didn't cut you off, did I? Okay, there you are. It's not there. I just opened it. I know I just opened it. Dang. One more try. Yay. Okay. Oh, so your question is about Missouri Compromise. Yeah, Missouri Compromise. That's a good question. Yeah, because everybody knows about Missouri Compromise, right? Like, of course we do. And we did go over that pretty well. I don't feel so terrible about how I went over the Missouri Compromise today. Let me give you some page numbers though. I know you're going like, we can look it up ourselves. I know you can. So I won't give you the page numbers. No, I'm looking. Missouri Compromise. Dang, there's a ton of stuff in this chapter. So 376 to, oh, somebody's saying something too. If you, poop. Do you know grown-ups that say poop? I don't know I grew up in a fundamentalist church, so I'm just afraid that if I swear, God will kill me. I know that's not really true, by the way. Other people around me have sworn and God did not kill them. I noticed. So I would go 376 to 378 for this discussion. It's pretty condensed. But if you talk about this, there's a lovely map that also might help you. If you talk about the Missouri Compromise, I think you got to get all the details in because it's kind of a short discussion. But, the good news is the details are pretty short there. You want to talk about how Missouri wants to enter as a free state, a slave state, how Congress is not so convinced about that, Talmadge Amendment, gradual emancipation argument, Henry Clay, Maine wants to come in as a free state, and don't forget to talk about Maine as a free state, getting to come in, Missouri as a slave state, establishment of the 3630 line, and the goal here, I put that in the wrong place, the goal here was to either to put off the problem. They thought it maybe was more of a permanent solution. It'll work until Mexican War, and then it doesn't work at all. So there you go. I don't know. Was that helpful? I'm like, no, it's not. Yes, it was. Yeah, I think that question is so concise and precise. A lot of times in this group of questions, that's the one people answer because it is, I don't want to say it's easiest to answer, but it's more concrete. So, you just get the details in, make a statement about the importance, and you're done. So, plus everybody knows about the Missouri Compromise because your 8th grade teacher did cover that pretty well. I don't know if you remember 8th grade. It was a long time. All right, and let's see if there's anything else we need to look at. Document assignment, let's look at that for a sec. Although some of you have done this already, so I know you're ready for this. Just a gentle reminder on this one. It's the document from the textbook. So I know you guys have the group me. So if one of you didn't get the textbook, you need to make a friend in the group me that'll send you a picture of the document. You know what I'm saying? All right. But you can see it's just that the full online source is really big. it's many, many pages, and the book source is 1 page. And we'll talk a lot about, oh crud, dang, that's the recording I've got to make tonight. So I'll talk a lot about this tomorrow, and then we'll talk about it when I see you again on Thursday in person, live at the right time. Okay. So this is a DeBow's review. It's a collection of essays that's kind of very Southern during this time period, letters to the editor, articles, that kind of thing. And this one in particular is about how the Bible supports the institution of slavery. How there are going to be some people who argue, people who want immediate emancipation, that slavery is a sin. And because it's a sin, it needs to be ended immediately. Because you don't have a like, oh, I'm sinning, but in a few years I'll stop. If you know something's wrong, and if you declare it sin, which is important in that era, when people go to church and we consider ourselves a fairly Christian nation, we wouldn't want to intentionally sin. Of course not. So if you can declare slavery to be a sin, it's almost like saying we have to end it now. So this is going to be a list of biblical reasons that slavery is fine. There's no reason to get rid of slavery. So might be interesting. Now, when you're considering the source and all that kind of stuff, this is a distinctly Southern publication. How did the 3 thing get over there? It's a distinctly Southern publication, so that's who the audience is. I'm not saying people from the North couldn't read it. Clearly, you can read whatever you want, but where it sells copies is in the South, and where it's written is in the South. So the audience is Southern. And it's from a magazine. And as far as credibility, that one's a little trickier, isn't it? Because certainly the person, he's not going to be lying. Yeah. So it's not that it's not true. It's just this is going to be something that's going to require an interpretation. Yeah. So kind of messy stuff. Oh dear. But when you talk about perspective, that's probably where you're going to want to talk more about how what the author is doing is using a religious text to justify a secular action. So, his religious text, the Bible, to justify slavery, and saying that this makes it moral. But of course, if you want to look a little harder in your religious text, you can probably find other parts of the Bible. I know Frederick Douglass could have, that suggest that slavery is actually a sin. And there's clearly someone else who's going to work on that during this era. So yeah, the lecture for tomorrow is probably going to be helpful in the document exercise. And we'll talk about this more specifically on Thursday. Try to make sure that you log in and watch the little lecture. And if you'll make a comment, you can just like a thumbs up or something like that. The only thing that I'll say to you, and I know I've said this before, is I had to do this once or twice last semester. Sometimes people would make their comment before, like I would post the lecture, like this one's going to be posted really late, like at midnight or something. And then at 12:02, they posted their comment. It's like, it's only been up for 2 minutes and the lecture is an hour. So yeah, and my intention, of course, is that you watch the lecture during class time tomorrow, but you can watch it anytime you want. It doesn't matter. But if it's only been up for 2 minutes, don't post your comment. Just, okay. You know what I'm saying. All right. I did find that entertaining, though. No lie. I was very entertained by my classes last semester. Even the guy that said I was a terrible professor right in the middle of class. Like, I wasn't as entertained by the married couple that fought. That makes me nervous. I don't like seeing anybody fighting. I'm wimpy that way. Yeah. I don't think it was very much fun for my husband when he was mad at me. It's like, I can't fight with her. It's not cool. All right. So our list of review stuff for this chapter. Oh, Jacksonian versus Jeffersonian democracy. We didn't really talk about democracy, slavery, and class. That's kind of that section where we talked about how they extended the right to vote to all white men. Alexis de Tocqueville wrote Democracy in America. He comes to visit. The book talks about this. I didn't mention it. I'm sorry. Alexis de Tocqueville wrote Democracy in America. I had somebody read that for a book review one year. That thing is 1,000 pages long and it's about political philosophy. I just shook my head at that kid. He goes, no, I really liked it. I went, okay, that's cool. But he talked about how impressed he was with certain things about the development of democracy within the United States. But the one thing that he said was a problem was how we dealt with race and slavery. And he said that, there were a lot of warnings during this time period. And of course, that people have talked about the dichotomy between a country that says that all men are created free and equal and slavery. That discussion happened before we were a country and continues while we were a country. And yeah, there you go. Henry Clay, American System, National Bank, Panic of 1819, Missouri. Yeah, all the stuff that we went over. The election of 1824, that's where Adams wins, even though Jackson gets more popular votes, but that can happen in our system when you don't win a majority. And yeah. Goals and accomplishments of Adams. Remember, it's all that intellectual stuff that nobody cares about during that time period. I didn't really talk about John C. Calhoun, who was, Jackson's vice president, and he's the guy who's going to lead the nullification in South Carolina. So he's going to end up resigning because he has a split with Andrew Jackson. And he will end up resigning and becoming governor of South Carolina. Yeah. Election of 28, that's when Jackson defeats John Quincy Adams and nullification, and that whole section. Election of 36 is when Jackson gets, it's 28, and 32 is where he gets reelected. 36 is where Van Buren gets elected. And, it's curiously interesting. I know that I did talk a little bit. Oh, crud, I didn't talk about Harrison and Tyler. I don't know that I have a question about Harrison and Tyler, but I'll go back and look. All of that bank battle stuff was what led to the Depression. The Depression really gets blamed on Martin Van Buren, which, that's kind of the way that goes. If you take office and something happens, and it probably the cause happened before you, but you get the effect, you're going to get credit for it, for better or worse. And for Van Buren, mostly just know that he gets blamed for the Depression, and the Democrats are going to split during that era. You're going to start to see the Whigs gain more power, which is why Tyler, Van Buren let's see, Harrison and Tyler run against Van Buren. Harrison is an old war veteran. We're really excited about Harrison, but then he gives the very long acceptance speech, gets pneumonia, and dies. And so then he dies within a month of his inauguration. It's not funny. I'm sorry that I'm laughing. And John Tyler takes his place. And Tyler mostly just vetoes stuff. And so he doesn't get anything done. He has arguments with the Whigs who control the majority in Congress. So whenever they pass a law, he vetoes it, and they tend to not have enough people to override the veto. So there you go. I don't know if that helped, maybe a little. I feel like I need to stop now that you feel the same way, I know. All right, so I won't see you in real time tomorrow, but I'll post something late tonight. And then if you guys will watch the video during class time or sometime, that would be great. And then we'll talk about the document question when I see you on Thursday, which should just be a normal class. All right, before we go, do you guys have any questions? I think I got the roll. Let me stop the recording.